Now let's shift gears and talk about the upcoming endgame against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Now we're getting there. We may actually see the black flag of the caliphate cut down. But in the course of that, there is some ugly urban combat to root out the last elements of ISIS from their positions among civilians. Now, the U.S. military confirmed that it conducted an airstrike in Mosul, where reportedly more than 100 civilians were killed. Now, there are still more questions than answers at this point about what actually happened, but this requires us to think about what are acceptable levels of civilian casualties in combat operations. Now, it's an eminently reasonable and moral idea that the death of civilians in war is horrible, and we should do everything possible to ensure it doesn't happen. But should we do everything possible to avoid it? Because everything would mean refusing to conduct military operations unless we have certainty there are zero non-combatants in jeopardy. Now, U.S. officials have said this particular airstrike was requested by Iraqi forces in response to sniper fire from rooftops of the buildings that ended up getting bombed. This is a pretty common tactic, and we employ airstrikes to avoid having to clear each building in house-to-house combat. U.S. airstrikes can hit very precise targets, and it's possible to take out the enemy with minimal collateral damage. But the large number of casualties in this relatively small area leads to the question of why were there so many people gathered there? It's possible that the buildings in question served as some type of shelter for civilians. We didn't know that. It's also possible that ISIS herded non-combatants into those buildings. In either case, if ISIS then placed snipers on the rooftops of those buildings and attacked coalition forces using innocent civilians as armor, they are guilty of a war crime. ISIS bears the moral and legal responsibility for those civilians who died. And it's not difficult to envision that scenario, given the barbaric and ruthless nature of the jihadists who fight for the Islamic State. They have shown time and time again that the lives of innocents mean nothing to them. They have killed civilians in every horrific way conceivable. Using them to create a tragedy they can blame on America and the coalition forces aids ISIS in slowing the advance, now pushing them from their self-proclaimed caliphate. Placing civilians as human shields, or worse, as lambs to be slaughtered, aims at disabling our military operations in combat. If ISIS can paralyze coalition forces out of fear that our most effective actions may have tragic consequences, they can force us to stop fighting them or put our own troops in greater danger. If we can't use airstrikes, we must send ground troops in, which greatly increases the casualties we'll suffer. The recent raid in Yemen that has caused so much controversy is another good case to examine. Yes, civilians died in this operation as well, but the troops on the ground reported there were many women firing at them, which makes them combatants and legitimate targets. And again, the enemy forces put themselves in the middle of civilians and created the danger to those innocent lives. The priority of taking action now to stop greater harm in the future is being taken hostage by a misguided notion that we can somehow conduct perfect military missions. We can't operate on the standard that no U.S. personnel or civilians should ever die, while we fight an enemy who will kill as many of both of those as possible if not stopped. That's a recipe for short-term comfort and safety, and long-term regret for the bloodshed and butchery we could have prevented. Of course, we must seek to minimize the number of non-combatants killed during combat operations. Our enemy currently observes none of the rules of war, and if anything, operates in direct contravention of them and civilization in general. That doesn't absolve us from our responsibility to respect the value of life. If anything, it reminds us to. It should not cause us, though, to shy away from making the difficult decisions that may cause the deaths of innocents now in order to save the lives of more in the future. I'm Jim Hansen, and you're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. We'll be back after the break.